The Marvel Cinematic Universe. The saga that has continued to put out movies every year for over 10 years, all the while following a continuous narrative. This franchise has made people love going to the movies. It has also been accused of grooming audiences to only go to the movies that are either sequels, reboots, or spin-offs of films they have already seen and enjoyed. I personally love these movies. I've always loved superhero movies though. But now that Captain Marvel will come out shortly and following that Avengers Endgame, I'm stoked. Something I thought would be a fun thing to do leading up to Avengers Endgame is try to review every single MCU movie to date. I was inspired to do this by another YouTube channel called Cosmonaut Variety Hour. He spends 3 long videos reviewing all the MCU movies up to Avengers Infinity War. If you have not already checked him out, I would encourage you to watch his videos. He is funny and gives smart insight on the MCU movies. I will go ahead and leave the link to his channel as well as the links to his MCU movie reviews. Also, fair warning, Cosmonaut Variety Hour's channel is not as clean as mine, so keep that in mind if that is something that is important to you. Besides that, I'm going to go about this project as reviewing the phases of the MCU as a whole. So strap in, get comfortable, and crack a cold one. This is the Mega Review. Iron Man, the seed that grew the MCU franchise into existence. This movie still holds as one of the best Marvel movies that have been released. Iron Man is about billionaire arms dealer Tony Stark, an arrogant playboy who is narcissistic throughout the movie. As he presents some of his weapons somewhere in the Middle East, the convoy he is with gets ambushed by a terrorist group and holds him captive until he can rebuild his weapons. Most notably, the Jericho missile. That is when he plans his escape with his captive cave mate Yinsen, who saved his life earlier in the film. Together they build the first Iron Man suit. Tony Stark finds himself realizing that the weapons he created hurts all sorts of people around the world. He then chooses to stop selling weapons of mass destruction, continue to improve the Iron Man suit, and ultimately make right all the damage he has done to others as a result of selling weapons. One thing that a lot of people do not know about this movie is that it is mostly improvised. That is why all the charm is organic and real in this movie. You can hear some of the dialogue and think, yep, that is exactly how one would react. The chemistry with each character shows that. With this movie being the first of many, we get to see Tony Stark's character kick off from being a self-centered jerk into someone who begins to care about the people around him. My only gripe about this movie is that I believe it gets boring at times. They do this a lot in the first and second act. Overall, solid movie, 9 bullet holes out of 10.
Are those bullet holes?
Though this movie is pretty forgettable, I have to acknowledge how beautiful this movie actually is. Something I really liked about this movie is the visual storytelling that was in the first act. There was a whole scene where they didn't use dialogue at all, but they just showed what was happening. This movie had a rough start because a lot of people didn't know if this was a sequel to the first Hulk from 2003, or if it was a reboot and a completely new take on the character. This, however, gets explained in the first few minutes of the movie as it starts up with the opening credits. The intro is nothing but exposition into the movie. It is basically an origin story to show that the movie is different from the 2003 film. After that, it shows Bruce Banner being on the run for a couple of years. This is where the movie takes place. As he hides in Brazil, he communicates with another scientist on trying to find a cure so he can get back to the love of his life, Betty Ross. He gets found by the US government and he begins to travel to New York where the cure for his curse can potentially be created. As bigger threats arise, the only hope putting a stop to these threats is letting the Hulk be unleashed. Okay, let's be honest, this movie seems very out of place from the rest of the MCU. And I believe it is because of one big reason. Edward Norton. Not only does he not look like Mark Ruffalo, but his character seems way different. I believe Mark Ruffalo's recast was a great decision, but you can't ignore this. You can't ignore that this movie exists. There are other minor mentions of scenes from this movie that other MCU lore makes, but overall the tone of this movie too is not like the other movies. I guess this movie counts as an MCU movie just a little bit more, with William Hurt reprising his role as Thunderbolt Ross. Honestly, if you were to ask Kevin Feige, the president of Marvel Studios, what movie would he want to scrap from the MCU, he would probably say this one. I honestly believe that this is not a good MCU movie, but I will say it is a good Hulk movie. Overall, I'll give this movie a 7 Hulk characters we will never see again out of 10. Iron Man 2 takes place 6 months after the first Iron Man. The world knows that Tony Stark is Iron Man and he has successfully brought world peace as a result. As he continues his life of being Iron Man, he starts to see that the arc reactor in his chest is slowly killing him. As he starts to live life a little on the edge, knowing he might not have much time to live. The villain Ivan Vanko, being the son of an associate of Tony Stark's father, Howard Stark, seeks revenge on the Stark legacy. Okay, pause. Let me just say this. Mickey Rourke deserves an Oscar for his portrayal of Whiplash. There, I said it. I mean, look at this. That's not acting. That's living. You think he looked good when he was younger? Nuh-uh. This is him in 2010. I mean, I'm not trying to sound biased, but look out, Ryan Gosling. This handsome devil is going to steal the hearts of millions. Besides the devilishly good looks and talents of Mickey Rourke, the film falls flat due to not sticking with a main plot. The first act is all about Tony Stark dying. The second act is him trying to create a new element for his arc reactor. Not for the sake of not dying anymore, but to finish his father's work? It isn't clear what Howard Stark had in mind. It was just, hey son, build the future. What future? He builds the triangle and it's over. What happened to him dying? After he builds the triangle after loads of Avengers references, he decides to be an actual superhero. Stop the bad guys and save the people, the end. This movie just felt like a placeholder and it seemed to pass the torch into the Avengers. They introduced Black Widow and I guess that's cool. But it did not feel like a superhero movie. It felt like a paperweight for the rest of the MCU. It felt like the inconveniences of Tony Stark movie. However, I have to say this. I have to give credit where credit's due. One thing I think Marvel handled so well in this movie was recasting Don Cheadle as Colonel Rhodes, Stark's best friend. I'm not sure if it was intentional or not, but every time I see this movie, I always get a kick out of how he was introduced into this movie.
Hey, buddy. Didn't expect to see you here.
Look, it's me. I'm here. Deal with it. Let's move on.
I just
Drop it.
All right, I'll drop it.
Overall, I'll give it a 7 My Birds out of 10.
And birds. I want my bird.
Well, okay, nothing's impossible.
I know this movie gets a lot of flack, but I freaking love this movie. People call it a weak MCU movie, and there is truth to that belief. But I believe this movie has some of the best emotional arcs that are in the MCU. Thor is what introduced both magic and space elements into the MCU. This was not an easy task. This movie has one big problem, and I believe this is what fans have been disappointed with. They played it safe. They played it too safe. I felt like Marvel Studios was afraid to make a movie that was too out of the ordinary. So they took Thor and kept him on Earth so he can be more relatable? They didn't dive too much into the magic and space aspect because they kept bringing it back to science. But Thor is not a sciencey hero, he is a cosmic and mystical one. This movie could have been and probably should have been the OG Guardians of the Galaxy, but it wasn't. That is why Guardians of the Galaxy worked, because it was ambitious and it owned how far-fetched it was. And that is why Thor falls flat. Though they played it safe, they took chances on the emotional arcs that are relatable. Loki dealing with his insecurity of feeling like he doesn't belong, that he serves no purpose. Thor, from being the confident prince that was sure about everything, to not knowing exactly what his purpose in life is. The reason why these arcs are forgettable is because Loki becomes crazy evil the next movie he is in, and Thor realizes his purpose never went away to begin with. Besides that, I think the humor is tasteful. Taking the fish out of water approach for Thor wasn't the worst thing to do. Nat Ports is fine, and Kat Dennings is not too annoying in this movie. Stellan Skarsgård does a pretty good job himself. Overall, I really like this movie, so I will give it an 8 animals big enough to ride out of 10.
I need a horse! We don't have horses, just dogs, cats, birds.
And give me one of those large enough to run.
Captain America is about Steve Rogers and how he went from being a scrawny nice guy who wanted to serve his country to being a muscular nice guy that wanted to serve his country. This movie shows patriotism. It brings us back to the early 40s where America was heavily involved in World War II. But overall, it just felt like a montage. It didn't feel like a complete adventure, it just showed clips of an adventure. There isn't a whole lot I can say about this movie. It has heart and it's charming, but the movie doesn't really know where it wants to go. I feel like the whole point to this movie was to give Captain America some reason to be an Avenger in the future. And that's a bummer. The one thing I will say about this movie is that even though you know Captain America is going to end up in the 21st century, there is a part of you that doesn't want him to. Take the scene where he has to crash down Red Skull's ship and Steve is on the phone with Peggy rescheduling their dance. This scene is heartbreaking. You had this lovable loser become the man of who he truly is on the inside. He is not just gonna have any girl like the ones that would ditch him with Bucky Barnes at the beginning of the movie, but a strong woman with integrity. Just when you thought he might catch a break, he doesn't. Wow, I guess this movie does mean more to me than I realized. With the romance aside, the movie is not super strong or memorable. I'll give it a 6 Hitler punches out of 10. Avengers, the movie that changed the superhero film industry. The film that lit a blue flame under DC to have an extended universe. The film that really wasn't supposed to work, but Joss Whedon did a fantastic job directing this masterpiece. Avengers is the conclusion of Phase 1, as well as the first chapter of a sharing and expanding Marvel Cinematic Universe. This movie brings in all our heroes. Iron Man, Hulk, Thor, Captain America, and reintroduces present characters like Black Widow and Hawkeye. To blend all these big characters with all these big actors should not have worked, but it did. Joss Whedon made sure to balance all the characters out. If any hero or character would have had favoritism, it would be Iron Man because we knew him the best at the time. Thor has his conflicting arc with his brother Loki, again, as Loki is the villain of the film. Captain America seems to struggle to get comfortable in this new life and future. Bruce Banner, though more skittish than my neighbor's rat Chihuahua, still steals the show when he turns into the Hulk. And the Black Widow and Hawkeye dynamic work well. I honestly can't complain about this movie. I went to the midnight premiere with 2 of my best friends at the time, and it made the movie-going experience more memorable. If I had to complain though, like had to find and dig deep on something I hated about this movie, I would have to talk about Loki. Okay, I didn't hate Loki. In fact, I loved him. I thought he was an amazing villain. However, Loki had such a stunning arc in Thor, and he continues it in Thor: The Dark World and Thor: Ragnarok. But I honestly think that was put on pause, just so he can be an evil villain for this movie. I thought he was an awesome villain, especially when he chews out Black Widow, but there is no emotional conflict with him, or at least not enough. There was a fan theory to this, and it was confirmed by Marvel Studios that as Loki wielded the scepter in the movie, which had the Mind Stone in it, it was supposed to be influencing a lot of Loki's actions apparently. Regardless, this movie is still the best Phase 1 movie in my opinion. The movie is still good after more and more MCU movies continue to come out, so I will have to give this movie a 9 shawarmas out of 10. That is it for Phase 1. It has been fun watching these movies all over again, and I'm going to continue doing this for the next 2 phases until Avengers Endgame comes out. It means so much to me that you have took the time to watch my content. Feel free to like, comment, and subscribe and enjoy more videos like these. With that being said, take care friends, and thank you for watching.